Hi there. Is Erin there right now?
Hey, I don't know. She may have walked away for a second. Right now I'm sharing my screen. Patrick, do you want to start sharing yours?
Yes, I'm waiting to see if Louise can do it, but if not,
Oh, okay.
I can give it a
Well,
shot right now.
no, I'll keep it up because yeah, I understand because we're both presenting. So whoever's not presenting should probably be the person who shares it.
Yeah, let me do that right now.
Okay. We were having some IT issues on our end.
Okay, let me see if I can.
Hey Nina, I'm gonna try
Mhm.
to override your screen
Oh, okay.
here.
Want me to just stop it?
Yeah, Christina's
Okay.
here with me,
Oh, okay.
and that should do it.
Okay. Yeah, I can see your screen now.
Okay, perfect.
Great. Crisis
Incredible.
averted. Okay. We can all relax.
Thank you,
We can all
thank you,
focus.
Christina.
Thanks, Christina.
Okay, great. In that case, since you all can see my screen, I'm going to start letting people in because it is 3:29.
Okay. Aaron, your screen is still in, like we can see the side panel. I don't know if you want to do full screen. Hi, everybody. We're just going to give it 2 more minutes to let people pile in. Thanks for coming today. Actually, 1 more minute. I'm going to start at 3:35, just to give people a little bit more time to log in. We will be starting shortly. Thank you. All right, so we're just gonna go ahead and get started. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Happy Thursday. My name is Nina Edemudia. I am the director of the Chicago Recovery Plan for the Department of Planning and Development. And we're really excited to be here with you today. The Chicago Recovery Plan for the Department of Planning and Development has been, we launched in the fall of 2021, and we have been rocking and rolling ever since. So we're really excited to always host these types of events to explain to the public how to apply for the funds and all of that good stuff. So I am going to go ahead and go through the agenda for today. So what you can expect is that what I'll do is give you an overview of what the Chicago Recovery Plan is. I assume some of you may know or have applied before or want to apply again or have heard about it from friends or family or maybe our city website. So I'll go over just like 30,000-foot view of what the Chicago Recovery Plan grant program is, and then I'll pass it off to my colleagues to talk about the specific grants that we are actually having or processing and collecting applications for in this cycle. I'm sorry, I was thinking too hard about what I wanted to say. And so we'll go through the community development grant, we'll go through the equitable transit oriented development grant, and then we'll also go into the climate infrastructure fund. And at the end, we'll hold a Q&A. You can always put questions in the Q&A section. There are staff members who will try their best to answer questions as we go along. But at the end, we will hold space for everybody to ask questions. All right, let's go ahead to the next slide. So the Chicago Recovery Plan for DPD, as of May of this year, we have allocated about $61 million in grant funding to small businesses and nonprofits across the city, which is really exciting. And so just to back up a little bit, during the start of COVID-19, as we know, a lot of our neighborhoods were impacted and a lot of the inequities that we knew existed before the pandemic were exacerbated by the pandemic. So under the Lightfoot administration, we created the Chicago Recovery Plan, which is a citywide initiative dedicated to helping to restore some of the economic vitality throughout the city for businesses impacted by COVID-19. And so that is a key factor in our programming. All of our awards are for businesses and nonprofits that were impacted by COVID-19 specifically. A lot of the funds are made up of American Rescue Plan funds from the Biden administration, and then also a local social impact bond that we've established in the city in order to accelerate those dollars given by the Biden administration. And so again, this is a COVID-19 recovery program. There's a citywide program. There are lots of departments who have their own grant making program. Today, we're just talking about the Department of Planning and Development. Although there is a website that has all of the funding opportunities from all over the city, and we can put that link in the chat later. We are just focusing on DPD's programs today. All right. So the three programs that we're going to be talking about in depth are our community development development grants, which are a citywide fund that are for new and established commercial spaces, and I'll kind of get into that. All of these programs kind of have their nuances. We have our equitable transit oriented development, which is, trying to incentivize development by transit, and then of course our climate infrastructure fund, which is trying to make sure we are being as green and climate friendly as possible here in the city of Chicago. Let's go to the next slide. So generally, and again, there's nuances to each of these programs, but I'm going to give you a general overview. Our programs here, what we call them small, we have small and large, but the ones that we're kind of focusing on right now are the smaller ones for this particular event. So that means grant funding up into $250,000. So the eligibility can include, and again, there's nuances, commercial, mixed use, light manufacturing, and residential with specific guidelines depending on the program. We also do include vanilla box type renovation. So even if you are a property owner, you're trying to advertise your space, or maybe, you know, the last person that you had in your commercial space, you know, because of COVID, they closed and you're like, I'm not sure how to attract a new user. We can do a vanilla box kind of build out to help you. And that is an eligible project. So it's open. Our grant programs are open to businesses, developers, property owners, and nonprofits. Again, with specific exceptions depending on the program. Selected projects must be completed within 2 years. You know, the Chicago Recovery Plan and the funds associated with it are not infinite, and they do have a timetable on it because they are related to COVID-19. And so we are trying to go for projects that are ready to go, ready for development, and have the possibility of being done within at least 2 years. These are reimbursement-based grants, so we do not upfront the money. You have to contribute, and then we reimburse you on the city side. And so that's a very important factor that we want to make sure that you understand upfront. You know, there's lots of paperwork and all sorts of requirements, and so we just want to make sure we're very clear about that to is a reimbursable grant. And then also projects are also strongly encouraged to have established site control and documentation in order to attain site control. If you don't already have site control, again, when we're looking at these grant applications, we're looking for something that's ready for the investment now because of the timetable that's on the funds affiliated with the grant. And so the closer you are to having site control, the better. Yeah, we can go on to the next. So our next application is August 18th. We have been talking, it has actually been open since we closed the application last time. Our application didn't actually close. It's just after the cutoff date, everybody else who applied after the deadline is in the August 18th round. Finalists will be announced sometime around December, November of this year. It takes about 6 months of an administrative phase to document submissions and finalize your project scope. If you are selected, that's what we go through, and then you'll get a conditional award letter. So even if you're a finalist, doesn't mean you're actually a grantee. You still have to go through a lot of vetting and background paperwork in order to get an actual contract and say, yes, we are committed to we are locking in the amount of money that we're going to give you. And then you have about 6 to 18 months to get your project underway and finalize it. And then, up to 2 years in order to close out your project. So this is kind of a little bit of a timeline. Again, we want to be upfront and transparent about what our expectations are if you are going to apply for this grant and what to expect from us. Go on to the next slide. So the grant structure. So although you are eligible for up to $250,000, it's up to 75% of your project cost. So if your project cost is $100,000, you're eligible to get $75,000 of that cost, if that makes sense. So if you want the full $250,000, you would have to exceed and make sure that your project costs are more than $250,000, so that 75% is $250,000. So we also want to be very clear about that, and also emphasizes the reimbursement grant, and that you do have to have some skin in the game as far as having 25% of the cost covered by yourself, and then the city will cover the other 75%. Yes, there are some nuances there. Climate infrastructure has some nuances with what's eligible, but we'll get into that in the call out. We can go to the next slide. Project selection. So just so you know how we're prioritizing our objective criteria here in DPD, we want to look at catalytic projects with strong local impact. So again, this is a COVID-19 relief program, right? So we want to make sure that whatever our investments are, that feeling can be felt throughout the city of Chicago. So we're talking about job creations, amenities, services that benefit the community. These are all things that you should be talking about at length in your application, right? Just assume the person who's reading your application knows nothing about your project, knows nothing about how your project was harmed by COVID-19, has no idea about your business. You really have to articulate in your application how your project is going to be catalytic. We also prioritize projects that are located in historically disinvested areas and build upon existing efforts like our Invest Southwest effort or community safety initiatives. So, make sure you do your research about what's in your area, what other plans have been in your area, and mention that throughout your application, because that again will help the application reviewer have a better understanding of how your neighborhood was impacted both by COVID-19, but then also maybe prior to that. Projects that demonstrate momentum and are expected to break ground in 2024 are also prioritized. Again, the money has a lot of these funding has a timetable on it, so we want to prioritize projects that are ready to go. And established site control, again, is preferred, but we will consider those working to obtain site control depending on the circumstances of that. And so that's another thing, again, you want to be able to articulate really well in your application. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to my colleague from Guidehouse, Patrick, to talk about specifically the community development grants. Patrick, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Nina. And yes, I am Patrick Liao. I am a manager over here at Guidehouse, which is really the city's administrative partner as DPD has rolled out all the finalists for each of these programs. Very excited for me and my team to go ahead and review a lot of the applications as they come in after the August deadline. But we are here primarily for today to kind of walk through a couple of the programs, what some of the specific projects that are included within them, what are some eligible expenses associated with each of these projects, and then wrap it up with a sense of what are some application tips that we can provide you as a prospective finalist here with DPD. My team has been, reviewing these applications as they over the past few cycles. Very excited to do that again. And so, I think we have some insight and tips to kind of impart at that juncture. But first, before we get to that point, I'm going to start off with an introduction of the community development grants. Erin, if you go to the next slide. As Nina said, what exactly DPD is looking for, whatever she said back then, specifically applies to CDG as well. So the overall goal of the program is to create thriving and safe communities through investments in the communities that make the city so great, and the people who live within those communities, specifically with a view to improving community safety as well as communities that have been hardest hit by the COVID pandemic. I'm going to get into a little bit more detail about, what is ineligible, who is eligible, and who is, not a little bit later on. But overall, I think the goal here and the main takeaway is to strengthen local corridors in the varied neighborhoods throughout our city, supporting organizations and businesses led by all of you, that's really targeted towards enhancing neighborhood vitality. And once again, equity is going to be at the heart of all of this as well. So I think this slide here, gets a little bit more detail about who is eligible. These bullet points are pretty comprehensive. I think the main takeaway here is, commercial mixed use or light manufacturing projects are kind of the main thoughts here, not 100% residential projects. So that would not be something that DPD is looking for here. If you are a business owner, an entrepreneur, someone who already owns property, or a developer in the community, this is a grant that's targeted towards you. Looking at applicants all over the city of Chicago. This can also go towards funding expansion and the renovation for existing businesses. And I think specifically in this juncture is worth noting what are some ineligible projects. And these include if you're a social service or a social assistance agency, and that's kind of your main remit and the purpose of your organization, you would not be eligible for this grant. Places of worship, heavy industrial use, or a home-based business location. I think these are some of the examples of what would not be eligible. And I'll also say here, if you're an applicant who lives outside of the city, that's okay. But this being a city of Chicago, DPD is requiring that your project is located within the city itself. So you're not looking at residential necessarily, but just where the project site is located. If you have questions about whether you're fundamentally eligible to receive this grant, we'll have a Q&A session at the end. So please hold your questions there. But if you have anything burning, you feel free to put it in the chat, and we will make sure to return to it as well. Next slide gets into what some of the eligible expenses would be under the Community Development Grant Program. Once again, this is pretty comprehensive. I think a really great shorthand that the wonderful program lead with this program has kind of taught me and my team over the recent past is what's an eligible expense is if you can pick up the location, imagine that you turn it upside down and you shake it all about. Anything that stays in the building is eligible. But anything that kind of falls out from that would not be. So if you're thinking about equipment like coffee roasters or shelves or decor, those are not eligible expenses under the grant. What would be eligible are renovations, build outs for businesses, security systems, roofing, walls, mechanical systems such as HVAC. That's a kind of the flavor of the eligible expenses that we will be looking for. So I'm going to be stressing in the next slide and then a little bit later on more detail. The more detail that you can present, the better. If you can itemize what each of these expenses are, that's really the ingredient for a successful project and a successful application here. We'll go next to some application tips. Yeah, let's put them all on the screen, I suppose, and then I'll go through them one by one. The first is readiness. I think we want to make sure that these are shovel-ready projects that will, that is possible to complete within the 2-year time span. And so specifically, so some of the sorts of things that DPD and my team will be looking for are detailed project budget as well as construction timelines. More information in each of the fields of the application. We've realized that many people lose points of otherwise great ideas just because they're not filling out these tables completely. They're there for a reason, and we would like to see as much detail as possible. For construction and design documents, this program, once again, is designed to be completed within 2 years. So if you have pre-development work completed, that would be of benefit to your application. And I think the city is trying to look for a vision of what your project is going to look like at the end of all of this. And lastly, site control. You need to be able to demonstrate that you have site control. So we'll get into more of it later, but this does not mean you need to own the building. You can own or you can lease, but you have to be able to show proof or show that you are on a path to attaining that site control. The next tip here would be feasibility. Because of the 75-25 split where, you as a potential business owner is on the hook for 25% of the overall costs, you need to be able to show that, you have that proportion secured, once again, because this is a reimbursement-based program. So showing the various funding streams that would allow you to, fund this project is going to be, something that we're looking for. And you also need to demonstrate that your idea is financially stable. So you can do this in a variety of ways, and we'll work with you on the details. But if you can provide a profit and loss statement, if you're already an existing business, or you can show just like a really great and a detailed business plan that outlines your financial projects for a first-time business or startup. Community impact. Just because the bones of this project really is potential businesses, organizations that really provide a positive impact to the community. We prioritize projects that just put a lot of thought and attention into what are the needs of the communities that you live in. Once again, with kind of a focus on communities that have been historically disinvested in. The strongest projects and the strongest applications are one where, if you have a compilation of, previous community engagement, letters of support from people in your community, or if that stuff is, you have a path to kind of attain those things, that would be great and ensure that your project stands a better chance of getting selected. And lastly, just due diligence wise, we do check for city indebtedness, whether you're delinquent in any of your taxes, making sure that your project is compliant with current zoning, and that your business overall is in good standing with our state. Okay, there's a lot of talking. I will hand it now over to the Climate Infrastructure Fund team to take you through this section.
Great, thanks, Patrick. Hi, everyone. Luke Mish, planner and project and program manager here at DPD. I am joined by Lindy Wardlaw from the Office of Climate and Environmental Equity, and we are going to give you a quick overview here of the specifics of the Climate Infrastructure Fund. So I'll turn it over to Lindy to introduce the program.
Hi, everyone. Next slide, please. So yeah, I'm really happy to be here. Again, I'm Lindy Wardlaw with Office of Climate and Environmental Equity, and this is one of 4 projects we're working on in coordination with Department of Planning and Development. The Climate Infrastructure Fund is meant to accelerate Chicago's green economy by seeding climate projects, and they align with both the 2020 Climate Action Plan, as well as the comprehensive plan earlier this year as well. And so the main goal of the projects is to promote solar and other community-based renewable energy sources to decarbonize buildings or significantly reduce the energy consumption in them through intensive energy efficiency improvements and comprehensive improvements at that, to increase electric vehicle ownership in nonprofits and small businesses, whether that's one vehicle or several vehicles, if you have a fleet of vehicles, and also to promote the installation of charging infrastructure, your EV charging stations as well. And then also improving what we call resilience infrastructure or green stormwater infrastructure, nature-based solutions to reduce urban flooding and to keep stormwater out of the systems long enough for them to catch up in the big rainstorms. Next slide, please. So you might, Climate Infrastructure Fund, for some people, the whole concept of climate action and these types of projects is new. And so kind of describing what this is and who can apply, again, nonprofit organizations, and that includes religious institutions, as well as small businesses. And I believe, Luke, correct me if I'm wrong, by small businesses, it's is a 3-year operate budgets of, is it 9 million?
Yeah, so there's a couple definitions there. One is, and this is the same definition that's used for small businesses across other DPD grant programs, but it's annual operating or annual revenues of 9 million or less for the past 3 years. Each year, 9 million. And then there's also a list of excluded business types, mostly related to either chain uses, or maybe things like liquor stores, other uses like that. There's a list on our project website of excluded small business types. That's generally what we're looking for. Yeah.
And then, while any nonprofit or small business can apply as long as you're in the city of Chicago, there is priority given to applicants in environmental justice communities or communities that are historically disadvantaged and underserved. There are some ineligible projects. A lot of people, when they think energy efficiency, there were a lot of questions about, well, I'm a business and I run an apartment building. We are unable to fund residential projects at this time, industrial uses, and a major renovation where the climate aspect of the project is just a very small component. So like if it was a huge rehab of a very large building and you decided at the last minute, hey, we're gonna put some solar on this, but it's only a small part of the budget for a much larger concept. So that is not this is not the right fund for that. Um, and so for eligible expenses, what's really exciting about this is that we really can walk you through the entire process. So you may not even have an energy assessment yet, and that is an allowable expense. An energy assessment, or if you're, for example, doing a garden on your site to do, a green infrastructure garden, site planning is an allowable expense as well. The construction and renovation costs are allowable. They have to be permanent capital improvements, infrastructure items. So, for example, you can put in the heat pump or the new AC, but you can't. The operations of it are not allowed. Just the infrastructure itself. So you can't pay for a new energy manager to run it. You can't pay for the training out of it. And there's a list of eligible expenses. If we go to the next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry. That's a holdover from another slide deck, but there are a list of expenses on our website. But essentially, it's all of the infrastructure components. It's if you're doing energy, it's anything that's the bones of the building and the installation. If it's if it's electric vehicles, it'll be the vehicles and the charging infrastructure. It may require you to do an electric panel upgrade. That would all be allowable expenses. So we encourage you to visit the website on that. To find out more information on that. Next slide. So Luke, I'll turn it over to Luke to dig a little bit deeper into the project types that I sort of mentioned already. And we're happy to take any questions at the end of this webinar or online later or emails.
Thanks, Lindy. Yeah, so within the Climate Infrastructure Fund program, we have 3 distinct project types. And we ask applicants to select just one project type when they apply. I will note that we are exploring potential avenues for trying to stack these, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a bit, but generally the 3 tracks, as you can see in front of you here, are the renewable energy and energy efficiency track, the electric vehicles and EV charging infrastructure track, and green infrastructure. And I know Lindy went over those very briefly in the past slide, but if we go to the next slide, I can dive into each of these a little bit more. Yeah, perfect. So renewable energy and energy efficiency. So these are projects that include either on-site renewable energy, so things like rooftop solar panels, wind turbines, even something like geothermal. Those can get kind of intensive, but those are eligible, as well as energy efficiency upgrades to a building, to an existing building. And I do want to stress that, again, I think Lindy touched on this a little bit earlier, but this is not intended to support financing of new construction, even those projects that may have substantial climate elements to them. This is really for the retrofitting of existing buildings. So among those energy efficiency upgrade elements, we have things like heating and cooling, heat pump, HVAC systems, air sealing and insulation, so improving the building envelope itself, lighting, replacing lighting with efficient lighting, which over the course of a whole building we know can tally up to large costs, and then things like heat pump water heaters and even induction cooktops. Again, for buildings that already have cooktop systems or water heating systems that are looking to upgrade those systems. If we go to the next slide, we'll see. Oh yeah,
Luke,
jump in. Go ahead, Lindy.
Yeah, Luke, I just thought I'd add one more thing just to be clear too, with the heating and cooling. One thing that Climate Infrastructure Fund does not fund is the extension of natural gas usage. So maybe you have a furnace or a boiler and you're thinking, oh great, we'll upgrade it. We would want you to look for solutions that are decarbonizing, or in other words, eliminating the use of fossil fuels. So we are unable to fund anything that is a natural gas improvement.
No, that's a really good point. Yeah, there are high efficiency natural gas systems and pieces of equipment, but those are not eligible for climate infrastructure fund funding. On the next slide, we'll talk a little bit more about the electric vehicles and the EV charging projects. So these pretty straightforward. If your organization or your company is looking to purchase an electric vehicle for the use of your organization or company, or more than one electric vehicle, the fund can support that. And so that could be passenger vehicles, that could be cargo, that could be any electric vehicle. What it does not include are plug-in hybrid vehicles. Again, we're looking to fund non-carbon based systems and equipment. It also does not at this time include things like e-bikes. It really is focused on electric cars, trucks, vans. And then also EV charging infrastructure. So, the charging system that would be installed on site can also be included here. As Lindy touched on earlier, we're only supporting capital improvements. So a lot of times these chargers will have ongoing subscription payments to link up with Wi-Fi networks that tell people where charging stations are. The installation of any of that equipment is covered. The long-term subscription costs or operations or maintenance costs for these things are not covered as part of the grant, but the purchase and installation of any of this is. Next slide, green infrastructure. So this track would capture anything basically that is working with the landscape of your site, specifically though focused on climate-oriented landscape. So that could be stormwater infiltration measures, things like permeable pavement or rain gardens or bioswales, or projects that have an intensive amount of native plantings, maybe native soil preparation, tree planting. I will say, to be competitive in this category, we are looking for projects that do have, climate impact. Again, as the name of our program implies, that is critical. So, I wouldn't think of this purely as landscape beautification. I would think of these as performative landscapes that are addressing stormwater and also biodiversity. We also include green roofs within this category. So technically a building component, but really acting more as kind of elevated landscape, if you will. And so green roofs are eligible under this as well. Again, we'll get into this a little bit more, but that can take the form of, these projects can take the form of a comprehensive kind of overall plan or kind of individual elements. The more that you can combine elements, I think the stronger your application would be. If we go to the next slide. These program priorities, really similar to what Nina touched on very early on. The only thing I'll note for us is the second one there. We are specifically prioritizing projects that are located within environmental justice communities. These are parts of the city that are designated as being particularly at risk when it comes to climate-related challenges. And so there's a whole host of metrics that go into that, whether that be about the demographics of the area or the specific risks that may be around that area. And if you go to our website, there's a little bit more information on where we're getting that data from. There's a state-based database and a federal-based database. We're using both of those to identify those communities. So just want to note that you don't have to be in one of those designated communities to apply, but we are prioritizing projects that come from those. And we'll go to the next slide. Okay, great. I'll turn it over to Lindy to touch on these.
Thanks, Luke. So just a couple of things to keep in mind with your application is we are really looking at technology and electrification. As we mentioned, we aren't funding anything with natural gas, but the more a project is focusing on high efficiency technologies like heat pumps, it's going to be a lot more competitive than if you're just doing some super basic energy efficiency, like some air sealing and insulation and throwing in some lighting. It's just not going to be as competitive as one that is reducing significant emissions in that space. If using another example, if you're just proposing renewable energy and that's it, it's going to be a little bit less competitive than one that's proposing a more comprehensive effort to put install the solar panels on the rooftop, for example, and pairing that with efficiency so that you're tightening up the building and using renewable energy. And then another example is EV. If you're getting an electric vehicle and you're actually replacing a gas vehicle, it's going to score higher. I sort of just mentioned this comprehensive nature. The second one on here is the more comprehensive and inclusive is a multiple strategies, it's just going to be that much more competitive. We are also really looking at, we know that you're a private entity, but wherever there is public access to these improvements, say a community garden space that you're welcoming the community into, or let's say you're putting a charging station in that you're actually making available to the community around you. And that can be, for a price, that's still fine. But we do know that more than half of our community areas in Chicago don't have access to even one single charging station in their community. And so broadening that public access to charging stations is pretty important. So if you're thinking of doing a project like that, that will be favored very highly. And then another thing that we'll be looking for in the applications is, we know that whether you're doing solar or putting in a heat pump or anything like that, this green infrastructure especially, that there is a longer term commitment that's associated with that. You need to understand what are those maintenance and operation implications, and showing us that you've thought about that, and that you're equipped or will be equipped to address that once you've installed whatever it is you're proposing. And so there are questions in the application that get at that, and we urge you to think about that, think about what those budget implications are, and think about how you plan to go about it, and tell us how you're thinking about that. So those are some important tips to keep in mind. And I would just encourage you to take a look at the resources on the Climate Infrastructure Fund webpage, because there are some really good ideas and examples of all of these things there. I think that's it for this one.
Great. I'll jump in just real quick for the evaluation criteria. Before I jump into this, and Lindy, forgive me if you covered this at the top, when Nina was explaining that most of our programs only fund up to 75% of eligible costs, Climate Infrastructure Fund is the one program that actually can cover 100% of costs. And I think Lindy may have touched on that, but just want to make sure that that was doubly clear. I know we didn't have that on the slide. So, the eligible costs are what they are, but up to 100% of those can be covered up to that $250,000 limit. So for evaluation criteria, I think we've kind of touched on these as we've been speaking, but the main thing we're focusing on at the top is the climate criteria. So does this project deliver meaningful greenhouse gas reductions or other environmental benefits? And or does it help a community or area adapt to changing climate conditions? And or does it help a community build local resiliency to future climate shocks? So that's one category of criteria. Another category we're looking at are equity. So are these projects that reduce systemic climate and environmental inequities for BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and other disenfranchised communities? What is the kind of equity impact of this project? And then finally, project feasibility and project readiness. So does the application show that the organization is prepared and ready to implement this project within a 2-year timeframe? do you have the staff to be able to maintain and operate these new systems or this new landscape or whatever it may be? So that's what we're looking for in terms of those criteria. Happy to answer more questions as the webinar continues. But I think with that, we'll turn it over to the next team.
Hi there, Lindy. So would you like to go through some of the CIF specific questions while we were still on that? Great. I can tee some of those up.
Actually, Patrick, would you mind if we went on to ETOD just so we make sure we get through the presentation and then save all the questions for the end? Lindy, if you could just hop in the Q&A and do some answering there. Thank you.
Totally fine. All right. Thank you, Nina. I will go ahead to ETOD then. This is the Equitable Transit-Oriented Development Program. An overview is on the next slide. If you could scroll forward, Aaron. This is a program which will provide grants for up to $250,000 in line with what was laid out by Nina at the top. But in addition, I think in order to kind of make sure that these programs are, as successful as possible to give people that solid footing, technical assistance with a wide variety of partners is kind of envisioned right now. So, alongside the funds, you'll be able to get access to kind of some of this expertise as well. The ETOD program is designed such that these are community-led projects that are specifically serving disadvantaged communities near high-frequency transit hubs. What exactly this means, we'll get into on the next slide. But overall, the goal here is to ensure that the city is able to spur dense, walkable development around these transit hubs. And so, if you go to the next slide, you'll see that what these projects can be span a relatively wide definition here. So projects can be commercial or retail. It can have some mixed use. You can be an arts and culture focused organization, and you can also be residential. Although the note here that's important to kind of say is that a proportion of the units in residential development to receive those funds must comply with federal affordable housing standards. And in terms of the substantive goals that the ETOD program is looking for, projects should overall align with goals of the ETOD program. And the application tips will get into a little bit more into that specific bullet point. You do have to be within half a mile of a high frequency transit hub. So that will largely be an L stop or a metro stop. But CTA and PACE buses are also specifically called out here. And be affordable housing, mixed use, or small business proposals. So that's a relatively broad definition. The next three slides are going to go into some examples of finalists that have been selected in that in the first round that we recently held like a great orientation event for. One example is Little Angels Learning Center. This is an early childhood center in Englewood. It's within half a mile of the Halstead Green Line station. They're using these funds, hopefully, to build out a facility, allow for partnership with other community-based service programs. So you can see, how this program pairs, that transit distance together with, really catalyzing, community building as a whole. The next is Food Matters. This is a food-centric real estate development in Bronzeville, which is scheduled to hopefully open up next year. It's within a couple stops of the 43rd Street L stop. And some of the activities that this building is hopefully going to be able to provide are commercial and shared kitchens and year-round indoor farmers market. So lots of community-focused needs that are going to be addressed by the activities there, healthier food options, nutrition education, and whatnot. The last example of the initial selection of applicants is 272 North California, which is in East Garfield Park and close to the California Green Line stop. This is an arts marketing agency, an animation studio that would allow for 3D architectural rendering, and is a new service that would that isn't here right now. So some of the application tips that the program lead specifically wanted to call out is adherence to kind of the overall values that they're striving for. So going in order, project descriptions, which are comprehensive, but are just still clear and concise. But it's like, what exactly are you planning on doing, with the facility as a whole, and how exactly your application aligns with the mission, vision, and values of ETOD policy. Get into a little bit more specific there. If this is a community-led project that's located in a historically disinvested area, centering the leadership of people of color, those are all plus points. And much like CDG, if you're able to provide letters of community support from other members of your community, demonstrate that you have a whole history with this business or with this organization, and a demonstrated engagement with the community as a whole, that would be stuff that we would be looking for. Once again, feasibility, I don't need to kind of harp on this for too long, similar to the other ones. Just, you need to make sure you're financing, that this is doable within 2 years, which is the readiness portion, site control, where, if you have identified contractors, architects, those are all positive factors as well. And just stressing once again for the residential side, if you are a residential project that's applying for ETOD funding, you need to be compliant with affordable housing requirements federally. Okay, I'm going to go into the application process then. I think this is going to dive a little bit deeper into 3 big application tips, which I'll go through in order, and then some of the common errors that my team has seen over the past few months. So first, this is something that you've heard again and again. If you have site control, we're gonna there'll be more detail in a few slides, but I think specifically, some examples of site control include, a lease for the project location, you have a deed to the location that would also be, good, a real estate contract, or a letter of intent to purchase or lease the project location that is signed by both the applicant and the current property owner. Other kind of readiness kind of signposts for us is, do you have a plan for construction? What is the timeline? What exactly are the detailed plans that you have on hand before you submit these applications? Do you have itemized costs within your budget? And I'm going to show you in a bit just what exactly it means to itemize your costs effectively, and what is your ability to fund that 25% of the project for CDG as well as ETOD projects. The next slide is community engagement. I don't think I need to spend more time on this, but what are the plans from the community? What is your record of community engagement? And showing that you have more than a passing understanding and a deep familiarity with what the current existing services and amenities are. Do you have a sense of what are the forthcoming plans for other businesses that might go into that corridor? Some of the downstream impacts that your project would impact the corridor. Those are some of the flags for deep community engagement. And the last would be design impact. So really what the city is, the next slide, Erin. What we're looking for a successful applicant is just deep considered thought about how exactly your project is designed, and where we're applicable, whether you've engaged in a design professional to kind of bring some of those ideas to life. If you have a design that centers equity and inclusion, that serves all the members and all the residents of your community, stuff that's breaks out of the mold a little bit, that's implementing a creative solution to kind of a long-standing problem, sustainability, sense of place, all of some of these aspects would be stuff that we're looking for as well. In the next slide, site control, you can refer to this in a little bit more detail offline. And if you have a question about, whether a particular document satisfies the city's desire to, to show that you're on the path at least to site control, do feel free to reach out or ask a question. But again, lease the real estate contract or letter of intent. Diving a little bit deeper into the next slide for itemized costs. This might be a little bit small, but I think, you know, the main, if you're not able to see it, there's a specific difference between, you know, the positive example at the top and the one at the bottom. So both of those have roofing needs. For example, the top example has that for $9,000. The bottom has it for $20,000. But what you'll see as a difference here is that the additional notes section for the top example shows that the $9,000 is going to go towards, you know, a fascia and a soffit that, you know, maybe is old and needs to be replaced. Whereas the bottom one just says one single line item, $20,000 for roofing, and, you know, without any supporting kind of notes or explanations as well. You also find that the one at the top is specifically supported by a contractor bid and estimate as well. So there's backing documents for that $9,000. No such estimate is found at the example at the bottom. Next slide for plans and construction documents. I think the goal here is any plans and construction documents that you're able to provide will be looked on a lot more favorably by the team that's reviewing your applications. So, you know, the one on the right just has NA for additional documentation that shows kind of what, you know, the plans for the space are going to look like. Whereas the one on the left, you know, just gets deep into the weeds into what exactly the site plan is. You know, what's the scope, what's the timeline, so on and so forth. And lastly, for financing, this is something that we've seen time and again. The more detail that you're able to provide, the better to show, you know, what is, you know, how are exactly you going to fund the project as a whole. And, you know, most specifically for the 25% that you are expected to fund, again, with the maximum city funding total of $250,000. You know, what is your plan? What are your methods of securing project financing, you know, for the totality of your project here outside of this grant that you are hopefully going to be able to receive? Those are some of the overall tips. That was a quick spin through. We're going to pause for questions here. If you know, if it makes sense, I'm going to pull up the chat and go through what we've already received. The first question is, if you've already gotten the community redevelopment grant, are you excluded from pursuing this grant again? Functionally, yes, but it depends on whether it's the same project location or not. If you've already received funding for that specific project location, then no, you would not be eligible to receive funds all over again. Next question is whether if you have a prior application, you'd like feedback. I believe this is something that would probably make more sense as a separate email that we'll kind of provide in the next steps, Alexandra. If there's anyone on the city side who would like to say a little bit more about, you know, feedback from prior applications.
Yes, I can say something about feedback. So, you know, in the time that we've been able to improve the application, make it more available online, just last year we processed over 1,800 applications. And so with that, we don't have the capacity to give everybody feedback. If you apply for a large grant, then the team that processes the large grant, because that's a slightly different process, as underwriters, it's a lot more complicated of an application. Sometimes they do provide written feedback or will meet with applicants for those larger projects. On the smaller side, we're dealing again with hundreds of applications, so we cannot promise you that we will give you individual feedback. I think the tips and tricks here at the tail end that Patrick just went through will be a good indication of saying like, hey, did I articulate this well? Did I talk about the COVID-19 harm? Did I give a detailed budget? You know, was my, you know, was going back and looking at the application, was it compelling enough? Also, you may want to look at things like doing your own city debt indebtedness check with the Department of Finance. Sometimes if they're, you know, somebody can make it to the end, and if they have city debt, then we're not able to move forward with them. Sometimes, most of the times we do articulate that to people who make it that far, but we don't always have the capacity to do that. So that's something that you can preemptively do to make sure that structurally, there wouldn't be anything keeping you from getting a grant from the city. And that goes just beyond DPD's programs. That's for all grants across the city. If you have debt on that project site, that, you know, it's hard to move forward with a grant application. So I know it's not 100% yes, because again, we don't have the capacity to do it for everybody, but I would say definitely lean into the resources that were provided for you here, and then the resources that are on the website to help you improve your application. Also working with one of our business centers through the BACP, which is Business Affairs and Consumer Protection. They have business centers and delegate agencies that specifically work with our grantees. So we can't help you grant write because of course we're evaluating the project, but if you reach out to them, they have actually helped a good number of our finalists make it to become a finalist via their technical assistance, which is again in a separate program through BACP, but they offer that help on our grantees with our grantees, and that information is also on the website. We can move on to the next one.
Great, thank you, Nina. I think there were several CIF specific questions. Luke and Lindy have done a great job answering specifically. If you have any follow-ups, you know, please feel free to use that Q&A function as well. I think just a quick spin through, you know, how do you know if you're in an environmental justice community area? You know, there's a specific tool for that that's been linked. If you have, you know, conversion to all electric for a remodel, you know, that's DPD is specifically focused on small businesses and nonprofits. So if it's a residential, you know, that might not make sense, and this is a separate DOH program. Next question, can the grant be used to cover consultant costs related to developing affordable housing? Again, someone in the city might want to jump in. I don't believe that it's an eligible pre-development cost.
Is that a question for ETOD? I wasn't sure what that was in reference to specifically.
Affordable housing might be an ETOD. We might go back to the ETOD program manager for a more specific answer. If you would, the next slide is going to have kind of a how to reach us details. I don't think we got a name for that, but please do provide a way for us to get back to you, and I will make sure that the ETOD program manager.
Can you repeat the question, Patrick? I'm sorry, I didn't see. I don't see it here, so I'm trying to see.
Yes.
I just want to flag that I saw that question pop up, I think, when ETOD was being discussed. So
Okay.
that's why I just want to.
Yeah, just saying the question again.
Mhm.
Can the grant be used to cover consultant costs related to developing affordable housing in a marginalized neighborhood such as Englewood?
Well, okay, so for the ETOD grants, we're not doing pre-development this round. We're talking about development. If you have a development project and affordable housing is a part of your project for an ETOD project, then yes, like project manager consulting fees are eligible costs, just like it would be under the community development grant or any of our other grants, but it has to be associated with actually building that housing, especially since that particular grant program is funded by ARP funds, which has very restrictive rules around affordable housing, as in, like, you can't just say, oh yeah, I'm building affordable housing. No, the federal government wants to know that it's income restricted based on HUD standards. You'll have to sign a contract. There's vested interest in it, you know, from the federal government. So, but yes, generally, yes, we can cover those costs, but they do have to be associated with actually building that use, that affordable housing use. Just to be clear. Thank you. We can move on to the next one.
Great. I think the one other question hasn't been answered yet. If you've gotten a CDG grant, are you excluded from pursuing these other two grants?
Generally, yes. I mean, this program is a COVID-19 relief program, and we want to be as equitable as possible. And if we're giving one site multiple grants, that's not being equitable, right? That's not spreading it out. And like I mentioned, we have thousands of applications. So our internal policy is that no, you cannot stack grants from this program, and that's how it will be moving forward.
Excellent. I don't see anything else right now that hasn't been already asked. Oh, this is the latest one from Brendan. Can I get multiple grants from this program for different sites?
Generally, that is acceptable. If you are an individual person, you can apply for multiple grants. Now, when we are looking at the final stack, and if we see that there's, if we're running out of money and we see that there's projects that we can't fund because we've already given somebody else 2 grants, and they're scored the same, of course, we'll prioritize that way. But you can apply. You can at least apply, and then the city will do our part to see. But it does have to be separate locations. We are not giving multiple grants to the same location within the CRP framework.
Great. I don't think there are any other open questions. I can hold for a minute. How long does the grant process take? Maybe it might be good to go back to the timeline slide at the top, Erin.
Yeah, so, and I think, is it saying, yes, so if they're saying like application, think the application deadline is August 18th. It takes us a lot of time to vet, make sure these things are correct, go through the certain channels, do, whatever. So, those announcements will happen closer to November, December of this year. And then, like we said before, you have approximately 24 months from beginning to end, which includes getting your paperwork together to go from a finalist to a grantee, which means that you actually have a grant contract. And then, working on your project between the 6 and 18 months to get to that to get to a ribbon cutting in about 24 months or less. And 24 months is generous at this point because we've been running this program since the fall of 2021. So, the clock kind of ends. We're trying to wrap up all these projects by December 2024. So the more you can show that your project is ready to go and that you be successful, the more likely you are to get into this program.
Another question about whether, yes, for the climate, for CIF, it is also a reimbursement only grant. Thank you for that question. Give it another minute or two. Okay. I believe that's it then, unless there's anyone else who's getting a last minute question in. I can give a wrap up.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for your time. Appreciate, everyone's effort here. Sharon, I just see your question. I believe that was already answered earlier on. Yes, there is, the Lindy and the CIF team does encourage the use of utility incentives as well. But noting that People's Gas Intensive don't apply because there's no natural gas funding here. Okay, well, thanks once again for everyone's time. Appreciate you showing up. And yes, this presentation, I believe, will be shared on the DPD website. Well, thank you so much. And bye, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Good luck.